The training deck of the Galactic Naval Academy hummed with the sound of 100 cadets practicing combat maneuvers. Metal boots clanged against reinforced flooring as beings from across known space worked through their daily routines. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone from energy weapons and the metallic tang of sweat from dozens of different species. Cadet Zephyr Kalos adjusted his breathing apparatus and tried to focus on the holographic targets dancing before him. As a Ventorian, his pale blue skin and elongated limbs made him stand out among his peers, but it was his nervous disposition that truly set him apart. Where other cadets moved with confidence born of natural aggression or centuries of warrior culture, Zephyr trembled. Pathetic, sneered Korath, a massive Krellian whose crimson scales gleamed under the training deck's harsh lights. His species had dominated the outer rim for generations, their natural armor and incredible strength making them ideal soldiers. Look at him shake. How did something like that even get accepted into the academy? 3 other cadets gathered around Korath, drawn by the promise of easy entertainment. There was Vex, a Morphean whose skin shifted colors with his emotions, currently displaying aggressive patterns of orange and red. Beside him stood Thane, a cybernetically enhanced Nexary whose artificial eye glowed with cold calculation. The last was Brutus, another Krellian whose smaller size was compensated by his vicious temperament. Zephyr tried to ignore them and continued his targeting practice, but his hands shook so badly he couldn't maintain a proper grip on his training weapon. The holographic enemies danced mockingly around him as his shots went wide, each miss drawing snickers from the growing crowd of onlookers. Maybe we should help him, Korath said, his voice carrying across the training deck. Show him what real combat looks like. The other instructors were busy with advanced classes in distant sections of the massive facility. This corner of the training deck had become an isolated pocket where academy rules seemed to bend and break. Zephyr found himself backing against the wall as the 4 larger cadets advanced, their intentions clear. Please, Zephyr whispered, his translator struggling with his native language's complex emotional undertones. I'm just trying to complete my exercises. Exercises? Brutus laughed, a sound like grinding stone. This isn't exercise, little fish. This is reality. And reality is that weak things get crushed. The crowd of watching cadets formed a loose circle, some looking uncomfortable but none willing to intervene. Among them were representatives of a dozen species, the insectoid Churix with their compound eyes, the gaseous ethereals contained in environmental suits, and the proud leonine whose maned heads turned away in what might have been shame or simple disinterest. Koratha's massive hand shot out and slammed against the wall beside Zephyr's head, the impact leaving a dent in the reinforced metal. Your species shouldn't be here, he growled. Ventorians are merchants and scholars, not warriors. You're taking up space that should belong to a real soldier. I earned my place here, Zephyr managed to say, though his voice barely rose above a whisper. I passed all the same tests you did. Tests, Vex spat, his skin now cycling through patterns of disgust. Academic tests. Knowledge tests. But, what about this test? He gestured around the training deck. What about the test of strength? Of will? Of the ability to take pain and keep fighting? Thane's artificial eye focused on Zephyr with mechanical precision. Analysis indicates subject stress levels at 97% of maximum tolerance. Recommend immediate cessation of pressure to prevent psychological breakdown. Shut up, Tinhead, Brutus snarled. Nobody asked for your analysis. But, Korath smiled at the information. 97%? Let's see how he handles 100. His fist drew back, massive knuckles crackling with the promise of impact. Zephyr closed his eyes and tried to remember the meditation techniques his grandmother had taught him. In his mind, he could see her weathered face, feel the gentle touch of her scaled hands as she guided him through the mental exercises that had helped him survive the Academy's academic challenges. But they seemed useless now, faced with the reality of physical violence. The training deck's ambient noise seemed to fade away. The conversations of distant cadets became a dull murmur. Even the hum of the ship's engines grew quiet. In that moment of suspended time, Zephyr felt utterly alone, abandoned by the universe itself. Koratha's punch launched forward with devastating force. 4 years of academy training had honed his natural Krellian strength into something truly formidable. His fist cut through the air like a guided missile, aimed directly at Zephyr's delicate respiratory organs. The blow would likely crush several air sacs and leave the Ventorian struggling to breathe for weeks, if he survived at all. But the impact never came. A hand appeared from nowhere, catching Karatha's massive fist with casual ease. The sound of the interception rang across the training deck like a bell, drawing every eye to the newcomer who had somehow materialized between the bully and his victim. She was small by academy standards, barely reaching Karatha's shoulder, but there was something in her posture that suggested compressed violence. Her skin was a warm brown tone that none of the assembled species recognized, and her hair was darkened, pulled back in a practical style. Most striking of all were her eyes, a blue so deep it seemed almost black, and filled with a cold fury that made several of the watching cadets step backward. "I think you dropped something," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent training deck. Her words were calm, almost conversational, but there was an undertone that made Zephyr's survival instincts scream warnings. Karath stared at his captured fist in shock. His species had bones like steel and muscles that could crush most materials, yet the small being held his punch as easily as catching a ball. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to pull his hand free and finding it locked in an unbreakable grip. "Cadet Sarah Chan, Earth Defense Corps," she replied, still holding his fist steady. "And you are?" "Karath of the 73rd Krellian Battalion," he snarled. "Release me immediately, or face the consequences." Sarah's grip tightened slightly, and Karatha's expression shifted from anger to pain. "Consequences? That's interesting. What consequences were you planning for him?" She nodded toward Zephyr, who remained pressed against the wall, staring at his unexpected savior in amazement. "This is none of your concern, human," Brutus stepped forward, his scales rippling with aggressive colors. "This is a matter between warriors." "Warriors?" Sarah's laugh was like ice cracking. "I see one being cornered by 4 others, too scared to call for help because he thinks it will make things worse. Where I come from, we have a different word for that." She released Karatha's fist suddenly, causing the large Krellian to stumble backward. But, before he could react, she had moved again, placing herself directly between the 4 bullies and their target. Her stance was relaxed, hands hanging loose at her sides, but every species present recognized a predator when they saw one. "What are you?" Thane asked, his mechanical eye whirring as it tried to analyze the human female. "Your species is not in our databases. Your physical parameters suggest you should be significantly weaker than a Krellian, yet you demonstrate superior strength." "I'm human," Sarah said simply. "From Earth. And we have this really annoying habit of showing up where we're not wanted to do things nobody asked us to do." The crowd of watching cadets began to murmur among themselves. Earth was a name that appeared in some of the more recent Academy databases, listed as a newly contacted world with a species that had somehow achieved faster-than-light travel despite having no external guidance. Most instructors dismissed humans as another primitive species that had gotten lucky with their technology. Humans, Vex skin cycle through patterns of confusion. Your species was contacted less than 5 standard years ago. You have no warrior tradition. No military heritage. Your homeworld hasn't even been fully surveyed yet. That's true, Sarah agreed cheerfully. We're the new kids on the block. Still figuring out how things work around here. But, you know what? We're fast learners. Karath had recovered from his surprise and was working himself into a rage. His species' natural response to being shown up was to escalate the violence until dominance was re-established. You dare to interfere with Krellian justice? I'll tear you apart. He launched himself forward, all pretense of academy discipline forgotten. His hands reached for Sarah's throat, intending to end this humiliation quickly. But the human female seemed to simply slide sideways, and suddenly, Karath was flying past her to crash into the wall where Zephyr had been standing moments before. The impact left another dent in the reinforced metal, this one considerably larger than Karatha's earlier punch had managed. "Oops," Sarah said mildly. "Sorry about that. Still getting used to the local gravity." Brutus and Vex exchanged glances before attacking together, reasoning that even this strange human couldn't handle multiple opponents simultaneously. They had trained together for 3 years and moved with coordinated precision, one attacking high while the other went low. Sarah ducked under Brutus's swing while simultaneously grabbing Vex's extended arm. Using the Morphian's own momentum against him, she threw him directly into his partner. Both aliens went down in a tangle of limbs and confused shouting. Thane remained standing, his artificial systems calculating rapidly. Error in initial assessment. Recommend immediate withdrawal and consultation with superior officers. Good idea, Sarah said. But, first, I think your friends owe someone an apology. The three larger cadets slowly picked themselves up, staring at the small human female with new respect and considerable fear. Around them, the crowd had grown as word of the confrontation spread through the training deck. Representatives of dozens of species watched in fascination as a being they'd never heard of dismantled three of the Academy's most feared bullies. This isn't over, Karath growled, his pride wounded more than his body. Krellians do not forget insults. Neither do humans, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a promise that made the Krellian scales ripple with involuntary fear responses. But, we're generally pretty forgiving if people learn from their mistakes. The choice is yours. She turned away from the defeated bullies and extended a hand toward Zephyr, who was still pressed against the wall, staring at her in amazement. You okay? Zephyr looked at her offered hand, then, at the four cadets who had been tormenting him for months, then, back at her. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand, allowing her to help him stand straight. Thank you, he whispered. I don't understand why you helped me. Sarah smiled, and, for the first time since appearing, her expression was genuinely warm. Where I come from, we have this saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I couldn't just stand there and watch. But, you don't know me, Zephyr protested. I'm just a Ventorian. My species contributes nothing to the military forces. I shouldn't even be here. Says who? Sarah's voice carried a sharp edge that made several nearby cadets step backward. You passed the same entrance exams as everyone else, right? You earned your place here through merit, not favoritism. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The crowd began to disperse as the immediate excitement faded, but many cadets lingered, stealing glances at the small human female who had just redefined their understanding of possible. The four bullies slunk away, their humiliation complete, while Zephyr found himself standing straighter than he had in months. I'm Sarah Chen, she said, extending her hand in what he would later learn was a traditional human greeting gesture. Zephyr Kalos, he replied, taking her hand carefully. Ventorian bones were fragile by galactic standards, but her grip was gentle despite the strength he'd witnessed moments before. Nice to meet you, Zephyr. I have a feeling we're going to be good friends. As they walked away from the scene of the confrontation, neither of them noticed the small group of senior cadets who had been watching from the upper observation deck. Their interest had been piqued by reports of the new human cadet, but what they'd just witnessed was far more significant than anyone realized. The galaxy was about to discover that humans didn't just show up uninvited to solve other people's problems. They showed up uninvited to solve other people's problems and, then, refused to leave until the job was done properly. And, sometimes, that changed everything. News of the confrontation spread through the Academy faster than light through a quantum tunnel. By the time evening meal was served in the Great Hall, every cadet in the facility had heard some version of the story. Most versions bore little resemblance to reality, having grown in the telling until Sarah Chen had supposedly defeated an entire Krellian war band single-handedly while juggling plasma grenades. Sarah herself sat at a table in the far corner of the dining hall, methodically working through what the Academy optimistically called food. The nutritional paste was designed to meet the dietary requirements of dozens of different species, which meant it satisfied none of them particularly well. She'd learned to focus on the protein content and ignore everything else. May I join you? Zephyr's voice was still soft, but it carried a note of determination that hadn't been there before the training deck incident. Sarah looked up from her meal and smiled. Of course. How are you holding up? Zephyr settled his elongated frame into the chair across from her, his movements careful and precise. Better than expected. Word of what happened has reached my dormitory. Some of the other cadets who were previously distant have actually spoken to me today. That's good, Sarah said, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with that outcome. But you shouldn't need someone else to fight your battles for you to earn basic respect. Perhaps not, Zephyr agreed. But, in the short term, it has made my life significantly more pleasant. For that, I am grateful. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Sarah occasionally glancing around the dining hall to observe the social dynamics at play. The Academy drew cadets from 47 different species, and the various groups clustered together in ways that reflected centuries of interstellar politics. The Krellians dominated the center tables, their natural aggression making them popular with other warrior races. The more cerebral species gathered near the viewing ports, preferring to observe rather than participate in the evening's social theater. "Can I ask you something?" Zephyr said eventually. "Shoot." "Shoot?" Zephyr's translator struggled with the idiom. "I am not armed." Sarah laughed. "Sorry. Human expression. It means go ahead and ask." "Ah." Zephyr filed the information away for future reference. "What I wanted to ask was, how did you do that? Korath is nearly twice your mass and significantly stronger than most species. Yet you handled him as if he were a child." Sarah considered her answer carefully. She'd been expecting this question, but that didn't make it easier to answer. "It's complicated. Part of it is training, part of it is physics, and part of it is something my species calls creative problem solving." "Could you elaborate?" "Well," Sarah stabbed at her nutritional paste with her utensil, "humans evolved on a death world. We didn't realize that when we first made contact with the galactic community, because we had nothing to compare it to. Earth is more dangerous than 96% of inhabited worlds in known space." Zephyr's respiratory slits fluttered with surprise. "Death world? But your species achieved space travel. You have advanced technology. You can't be primitive." "Primitive? No." "Crazy?" "Absolutely." Sarah's grin was slightly unsettling. "See, when your homeworld is trying to kill you every day, you develop certain survival traits. Humans are persistence hunters. We don't give up. Ever. We're also incredibly adaptable and we have this weird ability to function effectively under extreme stress." She gestured around the dining hall. "Most species here come from worlds where the biggest predator weighs maybe 50 kilograms and the most dangerous weather is a light rain. They evolved intelligence to solve resource problems and social cooperation challenges. We evolved intelligence to figure out how to kill things that were bigger, faster, and stronger than us." "That seems terrifying," Zephyr admitted. "It kind of is," Sarah agreed cheerfully. "But it also means that when someone like Korath tries to intimidate us, our brains interpret it as just another Tuesday." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Thex, a Valerian whose silver skin and imposing height made her one of the more intimidating instructors at the academy. Her forearms moved with military precision as she approached their table, and her compound eyes focused on Sarah with uncomfortable intensity. "Cadet Chen," Commander Thex's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "You will report to Admiral Krex's office immediately following evening meal." Sarah nodded respectfully. "Yes, Commander." "May I ask what this concerns?" "You may not." Commander Thex's attention shifted to Zephyr. "Cadet Kaulos, you will also report to the Admiral's office." Both cadets watched the commander stride away, her presence causing conversations to quiet at nearby tables. Admiral Krex was the Academy's commanding officer, a position that was traditionally held by representatives of the galaxy's most militarily successful species. For a first-year cadet to be summoned to his office was either a very good sign or a very bad one. "What do you think this is about?" Zephyr asked nervously. "I have a pretty good idea," Sarah replied, finishing the last of her nutritional paste. "Don't worry about it. The worst they can do is kick us out." "That is exactly what I am worried about," Zephyr protested. "This academy represents my only opportunity to prove that Ventorians can contribute to galactic defense. If I am expelled..." "You won't be," Sarah's voice carried absolute certainty. "Trust me on this." 30 minutes later, they found themselves standing outside Admiral Krex's office in the administrative section of the academy. The corridor was lined with portraits of previous commandants, representing a dozen different species but sharing a common expression of stern authority. Sarah studied each one with professional interest while Zephyr tried to control his anxiety. "Enter," came a voice from beyond the door. Admiral Krex's office was designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. The walls were covered with military honors and battle standards from across the galaxy, while a massive desk dominated the center of the room. Behind the desk sat Admiral Krex himself, a draconian whose scaled hide bore the scars of numerous campaigns. His golden eyes fixed on both cadets as they approached. "Cadet Chen. Cadet Kaulos." His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "I trust you know why you're here." I believe so, sir, Sarah replied, maintaining proper military posture despite being completely relaxed. Enlighten me. The incident on Training Deck 7 this afternoon, sir. I intervened in what I perceived to be an unfair confrontation. Admiral Krex leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his massive frame. Unfair. An interesting choice of words. The Academy operates under strict codes of conduct, but those codes also acknowledge that conflict between cadets is sometimes educational. With respect, sir, Sarah's voice remained perfectly level. There was nothing educational about 4 cadets cornering one and preparing to assault him. That was simple bullying. Bullying. The Admiral's tone suggested he was unfamiliar with the concept. Explain. Sarah glanced at Zephyr, who nodded encouragingly. Where I come from, bullying refers to the use of force or intimidation to abuse or coerce others who are perceived as vulnerable. It's typically done by those who feel insecure about their own abilities, so they target those they perceive as weaker to make themselves feel superior. An interesting psychological analysis, Admiral Krex mused. However, the Academy's mission is to prepare cadets for military service. Military service involves violence, intimidation, and the use of force to achieve objectives. Some might argue that what you call bullying is simply realistic training. Then, they would be wrong, sir. Sarah's statement hung in the air like a challenge. The Admiral's eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. Military force serves a purpose, sir. It protects those who cannot protect themselves, defends important principles, and maintains order in chaotic situations. What happened on that training deck serves no purpose except to make 4 cadets feel better about themselves at the expense of someone who couldn't fight back. That's not military training. That's just sadism. Zephyr watched in fascination as Admiral Krex and Sarah engaged in what was essentially a philosophical debate about the nature of military power. The Venturian had never seen anyone speak to a senior officer with such casual confidence, and he was beginning to understand that humans operated by a completely different set of social rules than the rest of the galaxy. Your species has been part of galactic civilization for less than 5 years, Admiral Krex observed. What gives you the authority to lecture seasoned military professionals about the nature of combat training? Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut metal. 5 years is longer than we needed to figure out that might doesn't make right, sir. We learned that lesson about 2,000 years ago, though it took us a while to put it into practice consistently. And, yet your planet's history is filled with warfare and violence. Yes, sir. But, we learned to direct that violence toward productive purposes. We fight to protect, not to dominate. We use force to defend principles, not to enforce them. And, we never, ever pick on someone weaker than us just because we can. Admiral Krex stood slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow over both cadets. For a moment, the office was silent except for the hum of the Academy's life support systems. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than threatening. Cadet Chen, are you familiar with the Valerian honor codes? No, sir. They state that strength exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That power is a responsibility, not a privilege. That true warriors fight for others, not for personal glory. The Admiral's golden eyes fixed on Sarah with new interest. It is a philosophy that my people have followed for over 3 millennia. It sounds like good philosophy, sir. Indeed. It is also a philosophy that has been challenged in recent years by species who believe that strength gives them the right to take whatever they desire. Admiral Krex moved to the window overlooking the Academy's training grounds. The galaxy is changing, Cadet Chen. We face new threats that require new approaches to military thinking. Sarah waited patiently for him to continue, while Zephyr tried to process the implications of what he was hearing. Your intervention today was noted not just by Academy staff, but by representatives of the Galactic Defense Council who were observing our training exercises. They were impressed by your approach to the situation. I just did what seemed right, sir. Yes, Admiral Krex turned back to face them, and that is precisely what impressed them. Your species appears to have an intuitive understanding of principles that other races have spent centuries trying to codify into law and military doctrine. The Admiral returned to his desk and activated a holographic display that showed the current political situation across known space. Red indicators marked dozens of conflict zones, while yellow markers indicated areas of growing tension. The galaxy is not at peace, cadets. We face challenges from species that view military might as the ultimate arbiter of disputes. Traditional approaches to these conflicts have proven insufficient. The Defense Council believes that new perspectives may be necessary. Sarah studied the holographic display with professional interest. What kind of new perspectives, sir? The kind that sees a lone cadet intervening to protect someone she'd never met before, simply because it was the right thing to do. Admiral Krex's expression was unreadable. The kind that defeats multiple opponents without causing permanent injury, even when those opponents clearly intended harm. Zephyr found his voice for the first time since entering the office. Admiral, if I may ask, what does this mean for us? It means, Cadet Kalos, that your training is about to become significantly more interesting. The Admiral's smile was genuinely warm for the first time since they'd arrived. Both of you have been selected for the Academy's Advanced Strategic Studies program. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. I wasn't aware such a program existed, sir. It doesn't, officially. But, as of tomorrow morning, it will. You will be joined by a select group of cadets from various species who have demonstrated similar, unconventional, approaches to problem solving. Your mission will be to develop new tactical doctrines for situations where traditional military responses have proven inadequate. What kinds of situations? Zephyr asked. The kind where 4 against 1 seems like acceptable odds until someone decides it isn't, Admiral Krex replied. The kind where strength is used to protect rather than to dominate. The kind where the right response isn't always the obvious response. Sarah and Zephyr exchanged glances, both recognizing that their lives had just taken a dramatic turn. Sir, Sarah said carefully, are you asking us to help redesign how the galaxy approaches military conflict? Admiral Krex's smile became predatory. Cadet Chen, I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you that whether you like it or not, you've already started. The question now is whether you're willing to see it through to the end. The office fell silent again as both cadets processed this information. Outside the window, the Academy's training grounds continued their normal evening routine, cadets from dozens of species preparing for careers in galactic defense. None of them realized that the nature of that defense was about to change forever, thanks to a small human female who had simply done what she thought was right. The Advanced Strategic Studies program began at dawn, in a section of the Academy that most cadets had never seen. Sarah and Zephyr found themselves in a briefing room deep within the facility's secured zones, surrounded by technology that hummed with barely contained energy. The walls were lined with tactical displays showing real-time data from across the galaxy, and the air carried the electric tension of classified information. They were not alone. 7 other cadets had been selected for the program, each representing a different approach to problem-solving that had caught the attention of Academy observers. There was Kira, a Selenian whose natural empathy allowed her to predict enemy behavior with uncanny accuracy. Beside her sat Marcus, another human whose specialty was unconventional engineering solutions. The group also included Trix, an insectoid hive mind representative who could coordinate complex multi-unit operations, and, for others whose backgrounds remained mysterious. Welcome to Strategic Studies, Admiral Krex announced as he entered the room, followed by Commander Thex and 2 other senior officers Sarah didn't recognize. For the next 6 months, this room will be your primary classroom, laboratory, and testing ground. Sarah studied her fellow selected cadets with professional interest. Each one carried themselves differently, suggesting combat experience that went beyond standard academy training. Marcus caught her eye and nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both recognition and respect. Your first assignment, Admiral Krex continued, activating the room's central holographic display, is to analyze a situation that has been developing for the past 3 months in the Kepler sector. The display showed a star system containing 7 planets, 3 of which were marked with red indicators. According to the tactical readout, the hegemony forces had established a blockade around the system, cutting off supply lines to the inhabited worlds and demanding their surrender. The hegemony represents everything we've been discussing, Commander Thex explained, her forearms gesturing toward the display. They believe that might makes right, that superior firepower justifies any action, and that weaker species exist solely to serve stronger ones. Kira's crystalline features shifted slightly as she absorbed the emotional undertones of the situation. The civilian population is suffering, she observed, her voice carrying harmonics that conveyed deep distress. I can sense their fear and desperation even from this distance. Standard military doctrine suggests 3 possible responses, Admiral Krex continued. direct assault to break the blockade, diplomatic negotiation to reach a compromise, or strategic withdrawal to avoid unnecessary casualties. All three approaches have been attempted. All three have failed. Zephyr studied the tactical display carefully, his mathematical mind processing the force distributions and supply calculations. The hegemony has positioned their forces to make direct assault prohibitively expensive in terms of casualties. They've also structured their demands to make meaningful compromise impossible. And withdrawal would doom 3 billion innocent beings to slavery or worse. Correct, Admiral Krex confirmed. Which brings us to the central question of this program: when traditional approaches fail, what alternatives exist? Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Before we answer that question, I think we need to ask a different one. What assumptions are we making about this situation that might be limiting our options? The room fell silent as the senior officers exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of thinking they had hoped to encourage, but hearing it articulated so clearly was still surprising. Elaborate, Commander Thex requested. Well, Sarah gestured toward the display, we're assuming this is a military problem that requires a military solution. But what if it's not? What if the hegemony's real weakness isn't tactical, but psychological? Marcus nodded slowly. She's right. Look at their positioning. It's not optimized for defense against external threats. It's optimized to project power toward the civilian populations they're trying to intimidate. Trix's compound eyes focused on the display with mechanical precision. Collective analysis indicates hegemony force deployment is designed for maximum psychological impact rather than maximum military efficiency. This suggests their primary weapon is fear, not firepower. So how do we counter fear? Zephyr asked. With hope, Kira replied immediately. Fear loses its power when people believe that resistance is possible, that rescue is coming, that they are not alone. Sarah stood and approached the holographic display, studying it from multiple angles. What if we don't try to break the blockade? What if we render it irrelevant? Explain, Admiral Krex commanded, though his tone suggested he was already beginning to see where her logic was leading. The hegemony is counting on the civilian population to pressure their governments to surrender rather than face starvation. But what if the civilians never felt threatened? What if supplies kept reaching them despite the blockade? The blockade prevents supply ships from reaching the planets, one of the unknown cadets pointed out. Hegemony sensors are too advanced to fool with standard stealth technology. Who said anything about ships? Sarah's grin was becoming familiar to those who knew her well. Marcus, how small can we make a functioning supply pod? The human engineer's eyes lit up with understanding. With our latest miniaturization technology? Maybe 2 meters by 1 meter for basic supplies. But that's not big enough to make a meaningful difference to 3 billion people. It is if we make 10 million of them, Sarah replied. Trix, your species specializes in coordinated swarm operations, right? Trix's antennae twitched with excitement. Collective confirms capability for large-scale coordination. 10 million units would represent significant but manageable operational complexity. I'm beginning to see the outline of your proposal, Admiral Krex said slowly. You want to overwhelm the hegemony's defensive capabilities with sheer numbers. More than that, Sarah continued, her excitement building. We want to demonstrate something they've never seen before. We want to show them that when free species work together, we can accomplish things that no amount of military force can stop. Zephyr's respiratory slits fluttered as he processed the implications. 1 million small supply pods, each one individually insignificant, but collectively representing enough resources to sustain the besieged populations indefinitely. And each one a message, Kira added, her crystalline features beginning to glow with emotional resonance. Each delivery telling the civilians that the galaxy has not abandoned them, that help is coming, that hope is justified. Commander Thex leaned forward, her compound eyes reflecting her growing interest. The logistics would be staggering. You'd need supply bases, manufacturing facilities, coordination networks. Which is why this only works if multiple species contribute, Marcus pointed out. Humans can provide the manufacturing base. Ventorians can handle the mathematical optimization. Selenians can coordinate the emotional support networks. Hive minds can manage the tactical coordination. And everyone else provides whatever they can, Sarah concluded. Ships, supplies, personnel, expertise. Not because they're ordered to, but because they choose to. Because it's the right thing to do. The briefing room fell silent as the assembled officers and cadets contemplated the proposal. It was audacious beyond anything in military history, requiring levels of cooperation that had never been attempted between species. It was also precisely the kind of thinking that traditional military doctrine couldn't account for. There are risks, Admiral Krex pointed out. If the operation fails, it could trigger a massive escalation of conflict. The hegemony might interpret this level of cooperation as a direct threat to their expansion plans. They'd be right, Sarah replied calmly. It would be a direct threat to their expansion plans. But, not through military force. Through demonstration that there's a better way. One of the unknown cadets spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the musical tones of the ethereal species. The philosophical implications are as significant as the tactical ones. If successful, this operation would represent a new model for galactic cooperation. Which brings us back to the original question, Admiral Krex said. When traditional approaches fail, what alternatives exist? You've proposed one possible answer. But, before we proceed further, I need to know, are all of you prepared to commit to seeing this through, regardless of personal consequences? The assembled cadets exchanged glances, each processing the magnitude of what they were being asked to undertake. This wasn't just a training exercise anymore. This was a real mission with real stakes, involving billions of lives and the future direction of galactic civilization. Sarah was the first to respond. I'm in. This is exactly why I came to the academy. As am I, Zephyr added, his voice stronger than it had ever been before. My people may not be warriors, but we understand the value of standing up for principles. One by one, the other cadets voiced their commitment. Marcus nodded his agreement with characteristic human determination. Kira's emotional resonance filled the room with harmonics of resolved purpose. Trix's compound eyes reflected the collective will of countless minds working in unison. Very well, Admiral Krex announced. As of this moment, you are no longer cadets. You are full officers in a classified operation that officially doesn't exist. Your mission is to design, plan, and execute the relief of the Kepler sector using unconventional methods. Commander Thex activated a new series of displays showing resource allocations, species contact lists, and preliminary logistics calculations. You have access to anything the Academy can provide, plus authorization to contact any government, organization, or individual you believe can contribute to the mission. How long do we have? Marcus asked, already running preliminary calculations. The besieged populations have enough stored supplies to last approximately 4 more months, Admiral Krex replied. After that, starvation becomes a real threat. Your window of opportunity closes in 120 days. Sarah studied the new displays, her mind already racing through possibilities and problems. We'll need to start with a proof of concept. Something small scale to test our coordination and delivery systems. And, we'll need to be very careful about security, Zephyr added. If the hegemony learns about our plans before we're ready, they could take countermeasures that would doom the operation. Agreed, Trix's voice carried the authority of collective decision-making. Propose initial operational cell of 12 individuals, expanding gradually as security protocols are verified. As the briefing continued into the evening, none of the participants fully realized what they were setting in motion. They were designing more than a relief operation. They were creating a new model for how civilized species could respond to aggression, one that would eventually reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. But, that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, they had work to do. Outside the briefing room, the Academy continued its normal operations, cadets from dozens of species preparing for traditional military careers. Meanwhile, in a secured room deep within the facility, a small group of idealistic young officers began planning the impossible. The galaxy was about to discover that humans weren't the only species capable of thinking outside conventional parameters. When properly motivated and given the right leadership, any species could accomplish remarkable things. And, when multiple species worked together toward a common goal, the results could be truly extraordinary. The hegemony had made a critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that fear was stronger than hope, that division was easier to maintain than unity, and that military force was the ultimate arbiter of political disputes. They were about to learn otherwise. 87 days after the briefing that changed everything, the galaxy held its breath as the largest coordinated civilian operation in recorded history began its final phase. What had started as an idealistic proposal by a group of Academy cadets had grown into something unprecedented, an alliance of 43 different species, working together to prove that cooperation could triumph over intimidation. Sarah stood on the bridge of the coordination vessel Harmony's Edge, watching as thousands of ships from dozens of worlds prepared for the simultaneous supply run that would either save 3 billion lives or trigger the largest military confrontation in galactic history. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of diplomacy, logistics, and engineering that had pushed everyone involved far beyond their perceived limitations. Final status report, she called out. Though her official rank was still only lieutenant, her role as mission coordinator gave her authority that transcended traditional military hierarchy. Manufacturing complete, Marcus reported from his station, surrounded by holographic displays showing production facilities across known space. Final count, 12.7 million supply pods, each containing enough resources to sustain one individual for 30 standard days. Zephyr's mathematical mind had proven invaluable in optimizing the distribution algorithms. Delivery calculations confirmed. Pod dispersion patterns will ensure complete coverage of all inhabited areas within the target system. No population center will be more than 50 kilometers from the nearest supply drop. Trix spoke for the collective consciousness that had coordinated the most complex logistics operation in galactic history. Hivemind networks report all swarm units ready for deployment. 12,743 delivery vessels standing by across 412 star systems. Kira's emotional monitoring had become crucial as the operation grew beyond anyone's initial expectations. Morale indicators show strong unity among participating species. Some anxiety about potential hegemony retaliation, but overwhelming commitment to mission success. Admiral Krex had insisted on personally overseeing the final phase, though officially the Academy maintained complete ignorance of the operation's existence. All participants understand the risks, he confirmed. If the hegemony interprets this as an act of war, we could be facing a conflict that spans half the galaxy. Then, we'd better make sure they don't, Sarah replied with the confidence that had become her trademark. What's the latest intelligence from the target system? The main display shifted to show real-time reconnaissance data from the Kepler sector. Hegemony forces maintained their blockade positions, apparently unaware that their carefully calculated siege was about to become irrelevant. Their sensors were focused outward, watching for approaching military vessels, not inward toward the planets they were supposedly protecting. Hegemony fleet strength unchanged, reported Commander Vex, who had undergone a remarkable transformation since joining the operation. The former bully had discovered that his natural aggression was far more effective when directed toward protecting others rather than intimidating them. 47 capital ships, 139 escort vessels, plus support infrastructure. More than enough firepower to destroy any conventional relief fleet. Good thing we're not conventional, Sarah observed. Time to launch? Admiral Krex checked the chronometer display. Synchronization window opens in 17 minutes. All participating vessels must begin their runs simultaneously, or the operation fails. The past 3 months had been a masterclass in the power of inspired leadership and cooperative effort. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save one star system had evolved into something much more significant, a demonstration that the galaxy's free species could work together when properly motivated. The key had been Sarah's insight that military force wasn't the only way to project power. By coordinating civilian vessels from dozens of worlds, the operation had bypassed traditional command structures and political limitations. Every participating ship was officially a private vessel carrying legally obtained supplies to legally designated recipients. No government could claim that their sovereignty was being violated, no military could argue that they were under attack. The hegemony would be forced to either attack civilian supply vessels, revealing themselves as the brutal aggressors they were, or allow the supplies through, proving that their blockade was powerless against determined cooperation. 15 minutes to launch window, Admiral Krex announced. Sarah activated the communication system that linked the Harmony's Edge to thousands of vessels scattered across 400 star systems. Her words would be heard simultaneously by crews representing 43 different species, each one volunteering their time, resources, and safety for people they had never met. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen to all participating vessels, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the vast distances separating the coordinated fleet. In 14 minutes, we begin the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. Not because we were ordered to, not because we expect reward or recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. Across the galaxy, crews fell silent as they listened to the young human officer who had somehow convinced an entire civilization to work together. 3 billion innocent people are counting on us today. But, more than that, the future of galactic civilization is watching to see whether cooperation can triumph over intimidation, whether unity can overcome division, whether hope can defeat fear. Today we answer those questions. On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, the assembled officers watched their displays as thousands of ships across known space began their final preparations. Each vessel would make a hyperspace jump to a precisely calculated position, deploy their cargo of supply pods, and immediately jump to safety before hegemony forces could respond. 10 minutes to launch window, Admiral Krex announced. Zephyr monitored the coordination networks, his mathematical mind tracking hundreds of variables simultaneously. All vessels report ready status. Navigation computers synchronized. Supply pod deployment systems armed and ready. Hegemony forces continue routine patrols, Commander Vex reported. No indication they're aware of incoming operation. 5 minutes to launch window. Sarah felt the familiar calm that settled over her before decisive action. This was the moment when all their planning, all their diplomacy, all their hope would either succeed or fail spectacularly. In 5 minutes, they would discover whether the galaxy was ready for a new approach to conflict resolution. 2 minutes to launch window. Marcus activated the final system checks, his engineering expertise ensuring that every technical detail was perfect. All systems green across all participating vessels. Supply pods armed for automatic deployment upon arrival. Trix's collective consciousness reached across space to coordinate with hive minds on dozens of worlds. Swarm coordination networks operating at optimal efficiency. All units ready for synchronized deployment. 30 seconds to launch window. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet breathing of beings from multiple species working together toward a common goal. This was what cooperation looked like when it truly mattered. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute. Across 400 star systems, thousands of vessels simultaneously engaged their hyperspace drives. The night sky above dozens of worlds briefly flickered with the light of departing ships as the largest coordinated civilian operation in history began its final phase. The Harmony's edge emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler sector, joining thousands of other vessels that had materialized simultaneously throughout the system. For a moment, space itself seemed crowded with ships of every conceivable design, representing technologies and philosophies from across the galaxy. Deploy supply pods. Sarah commanded. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 12.7 million supply pods erupted from the gathered vessels like metallic rain, each one equipped with guidance systems that would carry them to precisely calculated destinations on the 3 besieged worlds below. The pods were small enough to avoid most sensor detection, numerous enough to overwhelm any defensive systems, and fast enough to reach their targets before hegemony forces could organize a response. On the planets below, populations that had been slowly starving looked up in wonder as their skies filled with falling stars. Each star carried food, medicine, tools, and, most importantly, a message: you are not alone, help has arrived, hope is justified. The hegemony fleet reacted with predictable aggression, launching interceptors and activating defensive screens. But they had prepared for a military assault, not a humanitarian swarm. Their weapons were designed to destroy large targets, not millions of small ones. Their sensors were optimized for detecting ships, not supply pods. Hegemony vessels attempting intercept, Commander Vex reported with something approaching satisfaction. Success rate approximately 0.003%. They're shooting gnats with battleship cannons. Supply pod deployment 97% complete, Marcus announced. Estimated delivery success rate 94%. Mission parameters exceeded. All vessels, prepare for extraction, Sarah commanded. Phase 1 complete. As quickly as they had appeared, the relief fleet vanished back into hyperspace, leaving behind only the falling supply pods and the hegemony forces desperately trying to stop an unstoppable rain of hope. On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, the assembled officers watched their displays as success reports flooded in from across the target system. Every major population center was receiving supplies. Every isolated community was being reached. Every person who had been slowly starving was suddenly reminded that they were not forgotten. Hegemony Fleet Command is requesting immediate communication with fleet leadership. Zephyr reported, monitoring the military communication channels. Put them through, Sarah decided. The main display shifted to show Admiral Corex of the Hegemony Third Fleet, his reptilian features twisted with rage and confusion. Behind him, his bridge crew worked frantically to coordinate a response to something they had never encountered before. "This is Admiral Corex of the Hegemony Third Fleet," he snarled, his translator struggling with his native language's aggressive undertones. "You will identify yourselves immediately and explain this unprovoked assault on hegemony operations." Sarah stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by the alien officers surrounding her but her presence somehow dominating the communication link. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Galactic Academy. There has been no assault on hegemony operations. We have delivered humanitarian supplies to civilian populations. No hegemony vessel has been attacked or threatened. You have violated our blockade." Admiral Corex roared. "This is an act of war." Actually, Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm. "This is an act of charity. The blockade remains intact. Your ships are undamaged. Your personnel are unharmed. We have simply demonstrated that starving innocent people is not an acceptable military tactic." The communication channel fell silent as Admiral Corex processed this response. His military training had prepared him for threats, negotiations, and conventional warfare. It had not prepared him for someone who would simply ignore his carefully constructed strategy and solve the problem through alternative means. "The hegemony does not recognize the legitimacy of this operation," he said finally, though his voice had lost much of its earlier fury. "That's perfectly fine," Sarah replied cheerfully. "We're not asking for your recognition. We're just asking you to consider whether maintaining a blockade against people who are no longer in danger of starvation serves any useful purpose." The communication ended as Admiral Corex cut the link, apparently unable to formulate a response to logic that operated outside his understanding of military conflict. "Phase 2 successful," Admiral Corex announced, though his expression suggested he was still processing what they had just accomplished. "Preliminary reports indicate supply delivery exceeded all projections. Civilian morale on all 3 worlds has shifted from despair to celebration." Sarah turned to address the assembled officers on the bridge, beings from a dozen different species who had worked together to achieve the impossible. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Today we proved that cooperation can overcome intimidation. Tomorrow we start planning how to make this approach the standard rather than the exception." Zephyr's respiratory slits fluttered with excitement. "The mathematical implications are staggering. If this model can be replicated, scaled up, adapted to different situations, then we change how the galaxy resolves conflicts," Kira finished, her crystalline features glowing with emotional resonance that filled the bridge with harmonics of hope and determination. "The hegemony will not simply accept this outcome," Trix observed, speaking for the collective consciousness that was already analyzing hundreds of possible responses. "They will seek to prevent similar operations in the future." "Let them try," Marcus said with characteristic human confidence. "The harder they work to stop people from helping each other, the more they reveal their true nature. And the more they reveal their true nature, the more species will choose to work with us instead of with them." Admiral Krex moved to the center of the bridge, his massive frame somehow conveying both authority and respect for the young officers who had just redefined military doctrine. "You have accomplished something today that military historians will study for generations. You have proven that there are alternatives to traditional warfare, that cooperation can project power as effectively as weapons, and that sometimes the best way to win is to refuse to play by your opponent's rules." Sarah looked out at the stars visible through the bridge's viewing ports, each one representing worlds where beings lived and dreamed and hoped for something better than endless conflict. "Sir, with respect, I think we've proven something even more important than that." "Which is?" "We've proven that when good people work together, there's no limit to what we can accomplish." Sarah's smile carried the confidence that had changed everything, the certainty that had convinced an entire civilization to believe in something better. And that's a lesson the galaxy really needed to learn. 6 months later, the hegemony withdrew from the Kepler sector without explanation. Their blockade had become pointless when the populations they were trying to starve began receiving regular supply deliveries from volunteer networks that had sprung up across known space. More importantly, their reputation as an invincible military force had been shattered by a small group of academy students who had simply refused to accept that intimidation was stronger than cooperation. The operation that had begun with Sarachin catching a punch intended for Zephyr Kaulos had evolved into a new model for galactic civilization, one where problems were solved through collective action rather than military force. It wasn't the end of conflict, but it was the beginning of something better, the understanding that when free beings choose to work together, they become stronger than any force that seeks to divide them. And, in a small office at the Galactic Academy, Admiral Krex kept a holographic recording of the moment when a young human officer had told one of the galaxy's most feared military commanders that sometimes the best way to win was to help people rather than hurt them. It served as a daily reminder that leadership came not from commanding others, but from inspiring them to become better than they thought possible. The galaxy was changing, one act of cooperation at a time. And it all started with a small human woman who had decided that bullying was unacceptable, regardless of the species doing it or the reasons they gave for their actions. Sometimes the smallest gestures have the greatest consequences, and sometimes standing up for what's right changes everything.